Well, there are some occasions when I always feel that to say enough would still be to say too little. And I feel that there's no words I could use today to express the debt as nationalists, I should say, that we all owe to our main speaker today. I can only say that without this man, nationalism in Britain would not be where it is. My pleasure to introduce founder of the BNP, its ex-chairman and the editor of Spearhead, Mr. John Tyndall.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, fellow nationalists, I'm going to start by reminding you of something that was said by a spokesman of Scotland Yard and reported in the Daily Express in January 1999, just 5.5 years ago. We are going to infiltrate these racist organizations like the BNP, and we are going to put them out of business. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to remember those words, because I believe that a lot of what has been happening, which has perplexed and even outraged us, and which has led indirectly to this meeting here this afternoon, can only be understood when we remember those words. Now, I believe that we would have at least, we have about 80 people here this afternoon. I believe we would have had something near double had the word not gone out from certain officials in the BNP, don't go to this meeting. I know it's happened in Yorkshire. I have reason to believe it's happened in the Northwest. It's to your credit that you weren't intimidated, you weren't bullied into coming to this meeting. This meeting will be no doubt reported on in certain publications or bulletins or whatever, perhaps even on a certain website. And I can see the nature of the report right now. The meeting will be described as divisive, factional. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, why I have come here nearly 300 miles. I've driven up from the south coast to be here this afternoon. I oppose division, I oppose factionalism, and I want to see unity. I echo again the words of Eddie Morrison, we must see unity. Because all the nationalists in this country, together in one movement, will be an irresistible force. And they will be an irresistible force right at a time when the tide of public opinion is turning, something I have waited 40-odd years to see. The British people waking up, the British people fighting back. It is the very time when we most need to be together as one united movement. Perhaps not everyone here this afternoon will agree with me when I say that I believe that the movement under which we must unite nationalists in this country must be the BNP and no other. There are some people who think, no, the BNP is sold out, we must start something else. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I speak with someone with much experience of starting something else. We were in a similar situation back in 1980 in the National Front. where the hard work and dedication of many people built up a powerful force, it was wrecked within. And I and some others decided that it could not be saved, and we founded the new National Front, which was intended to be a temporary separation, not a divorce. And then later, when it was clear that separation was not temporary, it was permanent, we founded the BNP. That was in 1982. It took 10 years for the BNP to establish itself very clearly as the premier nationalist movement in this country. And it took yet more years before it started to break through to getting candidates elected. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have that kind of time now. We either save the BNP or there is nothing. And I absolutely discourage any suggestion that there is another vehicle, another path forward for our cause other than the BNP. Okay? Some of you may want to argue this with me. By all means, I'm not going to be going home tonight. I'm going to be around this evening and after this meeting, probably have a few drinks before we go home. Please don't come up with it now, but if you want to talk to me afterwards, I'm quite happy to discuss that matter with you. But I am absolutely resolute in that belief. It has got to be the BNP. We are not the dividers. The people who are wrecking our party from within, they are the people who are dividing it.
Yeah.
Now, I would far prefer that this were a BNP meeting. But I should tell you that the message was passed to me about a week ago. I haven't yet had it on paper. That's the way they work, these people. I heard about it third hand, that I have been banned from speaking on any BNP platform around the country. And also, Richard Edmonds has been banned from speaking on BNP platforms. So if we are banned by Mr. Griffin and his associates, then it means we have to hold meetings like this under different auspices. Just as I spoke at a meeting in Clitheroe a few months ago that had to be designated a non-official, non-BNP meeting because they twisted the arm and they tried to stop it being a BNP meeting. Richard Edmonds is going to be speaking at a very important meeting in, I believe, Rochdale. Kevin, is Rochdale? Yeah. Next week on Wednesday. I hope you can get to it. That has had to be designated not an official BNP meeting because Richard Edmonds, for what reason I cannot imagine, has been banned from speaking on BNP platforms.
Joe, it's still a BNP meeting.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It is still a BNP meeting. I was wrong. Kevin is showing a bit of bottle here.
Yeah.
Good for him. We need more people who show bottle in the face of these petty tyrants. And if everybody showed bottle, we would take back our party. There are some people who would be frightened to come to this meeting today, would have liked to have come, but are frightened. But I say, what are these people frightened of? What are they frightened of? Do they want an eternal debate, or do they not? Mr. Griffin is constantly telling us that he stands for democracy. Well, if he stands for democracy, he should allow the facilities for a debate over important matters within our party. I always allowed that when I was running the party. And I never tried to stop Mr. Griffin going around this country, often at his own invitation, to speak at meetings. I never tried to stop him once. although I knew quite clearly the purpose of his self-invited appearances at branch meetings. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't try to lean on anybody and say, you shouldn't have Nick Griffin speaking. I was quite happy to have an internal debate within our party, although I am alleged by some people to be a dictator in the making, or a kind of copy tyrant or dictator. But those are the facts. Now, the formation of the Spearhead Support Group and the Friends of Spearhead were necessitated by one simple thing. Spearhead was banned from circulation at meetings in the BNP by a decision of Mr. Griffin some years back. Banned from circulation, so we had to find a way of surviving financially, and we had to find a way of keeping our circulation going. The Friends of Spearhead has been a great organisation for raising money, the Spearhead, and I shall be eternally grateful to those who have contributed and still contribute to keeping it going. Some of them are here today. The Spearhead Support Group has a different role. The Spearhead Support Group is to promote the circulation of our magazine. Spearhead is not making anything financially out of the Spearhead Support Group. I made this clear at the beginning to those funding the SSG, but of course we naturally do want to increase the circulation. Now this is interesting because this was not Mr. Griffin's ban on Spearhead, which I think started about the year 2001. I could be wrong over that, but it was at least 2 years ago. That was not an awful long time after I had been employing Mr. Griffin and paying him for 3 years to be Spearhead editor. So Mr. Griffin showed his appreciation of that by banning Spearhead from circulation through the BNP. What was the phrase that used to be going around when I was a youngster? Take the ladder away, Jack, I'm on board.
Right around that feeds you.
Yeah, indeed. Well, there we are. Eddie Morrison made an important point in his talk earlier when he talked about loyalty. Loyalty to race, loyalty to nation, loyalty to our principles and our cause. I would like to add another important loyalty. Loyalty to each other. We are a movement of comrades and comradeship. And I don't hesitate to use that term, although it was hijacked about a century ago by the Reds and by the left. But comrades and comradeship, it doesn't have to be a left-wing idea. It is an idea that should link all racial comrades, all national comrades into one community. And this movement of ours will get nowhere unless we recognize a bond of loyalty to each other.
Yeah.
And no leader, whether it be Tyndall, Griffin or Donald Duck, has a right to demand loyalty from people unless he is prepared to show loyalty in return. One of the things that I want to see return to this party of ours is that spirit of loyalty, because it's largely gone. There are an awful lot of people in this party who are looking after themselves, I'm all right Jack, who don't give a damn about the party, about the cause, as long as they get their little pay packet coming at the end of the week or the end of the month. Now, I've said that I have driven 300 miles, or nearly 300 miles, not in one single journey. I stayed in the Midlands last night to come up here, because I have for a long time been deeply unhappy about the way that our party has been heading. Now, I should at this point declare my interest, tell you where I'm coming from. I have never been fanatical about being the boss. I do not have a Führer complex, as some would call it. I am quite happy for another person, a younger person perhaps than I am, to be BNP leader. In fact, not being BNP leader has enabled me to lead a much more stress-free life. I still am busy in the cause, but there are not the stresses and the strains and the headaches of having to be responsible for the fate and all the decisions of our party, and I would need very little persuading to carry on in that modus vivendi, as it were, that way of living. But I have been increasingly unhappy about the way things have been shaping. Unhappy, but not surprised, because I could see this coming back in 1999. I could see it coming, and it has gradually got worse and worse. The previous speakers have spoken this afternoon about the ditching of basic policies. Now, I've got to endorse what Peter Rushton said earlier. I'll say it in a different way than he said it, but I'm saying much the same thing. I've always accepted that we have to do what is necessary to win. I've never been one of those who think it's all right standing for certain principles if we go down gloriously in defeat, waving our little flag of principles and having been beaten and having this country taken over permanently and irreparably by our enemies. I recognize that in politics, in real politics, there sometimes have to be certain tactical compromises. I recognize, as Peter said, we have got to be persuasive, not always in your face. We have got to, at times, employ a nice and polite way of putting our ideas over. We have got to win elections. We have got to do what is necessary to be politically successful. And it's a complete fallacy, a complete myth, that none of this was understood and put into action before the present crowd came on the scene. The BNP, since about 1990, has been putting these rules into practice, behaving in a way that is calculated to win public support in Britain of the late 20th and early 21st century, not living some nostalgic dreams of past eras long gone. I say to those who say no compromise, depends what you mean. Sometimes there have to be tactical compromises, and a certain politician who is the political hero of perhaps some people here this afternoon said this more than once. Tactically, we have to be flexible, but our principles must be solid and unchangeable and not for sale. A myth about the old BNP. You know, you read in the press sometimes, oh, the BNP have exchanged boots for suits. What a load of nonsense. We discarded the boots a long time ago. Mind you, if the Reds attack us, then there sometimes comes a time when boots have to be used. Understand that, and even Mr. Griffin understood it some years back when he spoke in Spearhead of enemies of our cause meeting a well-aimed nationalist fist or boot. Do you remember that? Remember that? Yeah. That was Mr. Griffin 1996, I think it was, or it might have been 1995. Of course, there are times when this has to happen. But if we're talking about images, if we're talking about the public imagery of the BNP, we all understand that it's got to be suits, it's got to be smart clothing, it's got to be civilian dress, it's got to be polite behaviour, These people are telling us nothing new by coming along and saying we've got to do it that way. I was saying this long before Mr. Griffin came on the scene. So it's a complete myth that the BNP has exchanged boots for suits just over the past 5 years. I incurred the hatred of a BNP official, not a million miles from us here in Leeds, by delivering a gentle reprimand to him for appearing on a speaking platform wearing his working togs. He'd just come off the buildings or whatever, and without changing into a decent suit. I think he's hated me ever since. No names, no pactorial, but no one needs to tell me about the need to be smartly dressed, the need to present ourselves in a polished manner. So I have been unhappy, not about the idea of a polished, polite, voter-friendly image of the BNP. We all agreed, or nearly all agreed, about the need for that. I have been unhappy about certain policy changes, certain public postures, which in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, do not win a single vote. Now this is the important thing to understand. I don't like hearing this talk, oh, we mustn't sacrifice our principles for votes, because that implies that all this nonsense, Sikhs on television, Sikhs in the party newspaper, black sons-in-law and so on and so forth, it all implies that these things win votes. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe they do. Now we have here this afternoon, I'm very pleased to see my good friend Steve Smith from Burnley. Now Steve Smith is, in terms of elections, the most successful organiser in the history of the BNP, the most successful organiser in the history of nationalism. This is not to denigrate the good efforts of other organisers who perhaps would have been able to do as good job but didn't have particularly unique opportunities, a unique situation that Steve Smith had. But Steve Smith was the prime architect. There are many more now in Burnley, excellent people, and some of them are here today. There's Sharon from Burnley who plays a great part too. But in the first place, Steve and just one or two others got the thing going, and they didn't do it. They didn't score these remarkable election results by going around parading their Sikh members. They didn't win a large portion of the electorate vote of Burnley by putting up Jewish candidates. They did it by full-blooded British racial nationalism. Presented with a polite face, presented in a tactful way, certainly. But there was no compromise over principles. I do not believe that these dodges and these gimmicks do anything to endear us to the British public. So let's get that straight. This is not just a question of, you know, the hardcore of believers versus the pragmatic politicians, as Peter Rushton said earlier, and I think Peter's point was the most important one. There is this phony division, you know, between the militants and the moderates. I've never believed this division to be a real one. Never. That in every movement you are always going to get some people who have a tendency, perhaps because of something in their character, to present their ideas in a rather more forceful way than other people in the movement. We have to use our own styles suited to our own characters and our own personalities. I have a rather naturally aggressive streak in me when it comes to my politics. And I know myself, and I know there are times when I have to curb it. The thing is to understand yourself and to curb your natural aggression at times when aggression is the wrong policy. You know, when we're confronted by Reds on the streets, as Eddie has related very graphically a little earlier, then are the times when we have to bring out the aggressive side of us. There are other times we're on the doorstep canvassing, we have to submerge that aggressive side. We all know this. There are different situations, some calling for a more aggressive approach, others for a less aggressive approach. I have never believed in this division between so-called moderates and so-called militants. I believe that this division is a division which has been very subtly created by our enemies to set us against each other and drive us apart.
Hear, hear.
But, I say again, I accept this completely. We have to do what is necessary to win. There is no dispute about that. I am not interested in fighting loser politics. I'm not interested in going down to glory, waving a little ideological flag before disappearing into the mire of defeat and history. I want to win as much as any of these people claim they do. Whether they actually do is another matter. They claim they do. But Steve Smith in Burnley has shown us how to win without compromising. Steve Smith, I mustn't just say Steve because he's now got an excellent team as well, but Steve Smith in the first place was the pioneer of that in Burnley. And our friends in Bradford. Our friends in Bradford only last month, and I don't know any of them, whether they're here this afternoon. If they are, I'd be delighted to meet them. But our friends in Bradford, 4 of them, showed us how to win last month. They got on the council under the system of, 3 votes per voter or something like that, but they made a start. They got 4 people on the council. And these people, too, are setting an example on how to win. And that's all I'm interested in, is winning. Well, not quite all, because, as has been said earlier this afternoon, what is the point of winning if you get yourself in a position like Gianfranco Fini of the National Alliance of Israel? Now, what has Mr. Fini done to stop the destruction of his country? Very little. Perhaps he's too busy making trips to Israel and kissing the feet of the Israeli leaders to have time to address himself to the problems of Italy. Mr. Fini, I think, once said, he gave a speech of praise to a previous Italian politician of the 1920s, 30s and 40s. But then Mr. Fini started to see the way the wind was blowing, and he was seduced and, coaxed into the salons by the elite, and he abandoned bit by bit his principles. But Mr. Fini is not fit to lick the boots of that previous Italian leader. Now, we don't want to live in the past, because the past is past and things have to be done differently today. We all know that. We're not trying to recreate in the BNP the conditions of the 30s, in Italy or Germany or wherever. We are not trying to do that, and there is nobody I know who's serious about the promotion of the BNP who imagines that we can relive those times. We can gain some inspiration from achievements achieved. We can gain some lessons from mistakes made. We can study that phase of history, and we can pay, in our own minds perhaps, just privately, we can pay our own little private tribute to the things achieved by the men who fought for Europe. Because it was not a united, not a common market Europe, not an EC or an EU Europe, not a Europe all merged together, but European culture and civilization and the European race. We can remember those people. We can respect the enormous sacrifices that they made. but we know that we cannot do things the same way now. We are in different times. We all understand that, and I think that I understood it before certain people who are now pontificating from the inner councils of the BNP. Now, you remember the case of the black son-in-law. That didn't get us a single extra vote, but it caused enormous demoralization within our party. And I wrote an article in Spearhead saying, what is the use of using these gimmicks on the half chance that you might win 2 or 3 extra votes, because that's the most you will win? Is there something going on out there, Mr. Chairman? Should we suspend the meeting?
Please do his best not to leave the meeting while our...
Is there another meeting taking place outside there, or is this I can't quite see the point in travelling distances, and I'm not talking about the south coast where I've come from, but even from over the Pennines, or wherever, or even 2 or 3 miles to a meeting, if you're going to walk out and hold another meeting in the foyer, or whatever you call it. I can't quite see the point in that. There we are. I hope it is being dealt with. No, the black son-in-law business, that caused enormous demoralization. I wrote an article saying that any leadership has to keep his eye, one, on the need to expand public support. We all know that. We all accept it. At the same time, that leadership also has to keep an eye on the need to keep his own following united, of firm resolve, of high morale, and of the right spirit to go on and keep working forward. It is no good with these gimmicks if you demoralize half the party, particularly as it is usually the best half of the party. That's not politically clever at all. But some people think it is enormously clever, very, very smart, sophisticated politics to demoralize your best activists in the party in order to get a friendly headline in a Fleet Street newspaper or something like that. Not Fleet Street anymore, but you know what I mean. It's not clever at all. Mr. Griffin made a statement when Monsieur Le Pen came over here earlier this year to attend this press conference in Manchester, and then later at this dinner. I was very pleased that Monsieur Le Pen came over. I think he did us an honour. He is a politician. I don't agree with everything he says and does. I don't agree with everything about his party. But he is a man of achievement. He has got results, and I respect him for that. He is a real political force. He is a giant, compared with some of the pygmies who he was, cohabiting with a short time ago, sitting at the same dinner table. I felt rather sorry for him, being used in that way, but I was pleased that he came over. But on that occasion, I understand that Mr. Griffin made a statement. In fact, I believe I saw it. My wife and I watched several television reports of this day, and Mr. Griffin said at a certain point, ethnic minorities, described as long-term legal visitors, could stay in this country as long as they obey our ways. He added, an all-black Africa and an all-white Europe was an unachievable utopia, and that the real issue was that countries maintained their own identities within Europe. Countries maintained their own identities within Europe. Now that sounds to me like an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. How can we retain our identity, whether we are French, British, German, or whatever, if we allow legals or illegals, it doesn't matter, to stay here in our borders? How can we possibly... not believe that an all-white Europe is an unachievable utopia. I believe it is absolutely achievable, and I am resolved, as I know many of you are resolved, that one day, through our work and our struggle, it will one day be there. So I'm even prepared to endorse a voluntary repatriation program, and in fact, those of you who have got a copy of the 11th Hour will know, if they've read it thoroughly, that in that book I said we should start with a voluntary repatriation program. But, and this is a very important but, if this program does not succeed in solving the racial problem in this country, then we should be ready to adopt an alternative program, if necessary, that is not voluntary. Now, that's all we need to say. We don't even need to say the second part of that. We don't even need to say the second part. When we won Millwall, the seat in East London in 1993, before any of these people came on the scene and started peddling their liberal nationalism, when we won that seat in Millwall, we didn't go round to every door, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We represent the compulsory repatriation party. They're all going to be on the boats tomorrow morning. Of course we didn't. Don't insult our intelligence. I did a lot of canvassing in the by-election in Dagenham in 1994 when I was the candidate and won 7% of the vote. Now that was in a constituency-sized area, not a ward. In a by-election, a parliamentary by-election, in 1994, long before this huge wave of public opinion started to flow in our favour. And I did a lot of canvassing in that election. And I don't remember one single person on the doorstep saying, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to send them home? Is it going to be voluntary or is it going to be compulsory? Not one single person was interested. You call on the doorstep, and you say, we want to stop immigration. I'm with you, Gov. I'm with you. That's enough. You don't have to say any more. You don't have time to get into a long, convoluted discussion about our policies and every nitpicking point. You don't have time. You've got to call on thousands of people. In the case of a ward, hundreds of people, or maybe 1,000 or more people at least. You never have the time for more than just 2 or 3 words, just a sentence or two. So it never gets to the point where you talk about compulsory or voluntary repatriation. And I am not advocating that we go screaming from the rooftops that we're going to send everyone back on the next boat at gunpoint. Of course we're not. But I believe that we must find ways, the nicest way possible, and I do stress possible, of resolving the race problem that we have. And that means working for an all-white Britain.
Yeah.
And it does not inspire confidence when the leadership of a party, and I'm not just talking about one person, it does not inspire confidence when those who have worn out footwear trudging the streets, those who have taken blows from the red mob, those who have contributed money, probably far beyond their means, are told that the leadership of the party no longer believes in a white Britain. It is what we are fighting for. It is what we have always fought for. That's what we must continue fighting for. Always accepting that this program has to be presented in a polite and moderate way, certainly at times. Now, from that subject of immigration, I want to come for a moment to the Euro elections. In my last article in Spearhead, which many of you will have read, I related how in 1999, after the Euro elections, we'd spent an enormous amount of effort and money, and we held a conference to stocktake the gains as against the efforts and the the investment of money and effort, the profit-effort ratio, as has sometimes been called. My own opinion, through hard experience, my own opinion, weighing the things up, balancing the books, was that although we did get gains, we didn't expect to get anyone elected, we had a hope of that, but we did get some gains of recruitment, publicity, but I believed, as a result of that experience, that the gains did not justify the huge effort and expenditure. And I put it up as a motion for discussion. I wanted to hear other views, you know. I wanted a genuine debate in the party about this, certainly amongst the leading officers in the party, whether we should go for this again when the next Euro elections came round. My own belief was that we should not. We should perhaps fight 1 seat or 2 seats if a particularly favourable situation and a favourable region came along, but to fight all the seats in the UK or all the regions in mainland Britain was, in my opinion, a vast waste of money. In an election in which we were always going to come second best to UKIP. UKIP got 3 people elected in 1999. It was always on the cards that the next time this party went into a Euro election, it would be fighting under a great handicap in relation to UKIP. And so it proved. UKIP got 12 people elected? We got none. Mr. Griffin wrote to me sometimes last year, asking for my help in contributing towards the Euro election campaign, which, as you know, dominated the BNP for the last year or 2. It dominated everything, every bulletin, every newspaper, every magazine. It was all about the Euro election. The local government elections took second place. Mr. Griffin wrote to me, now some of you may know, that years ago a supporter of our party died and left a legacy in my hands to be used for the cause. A substantial amount of money. Half of that money was spent fighting the Euro election in 1999, half of it. And the other half I retained, believing that if I let it get into anybody else's hands, it would be misused. That money, most of it is still there now, and it is ready to be used for our cause when I have confidence that the people using it are people to be trusted with large sums of money. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on people's integrity, honesty, or anything like that. I'm simply talking about responsibility. Whether they are the people who have the prudence to handle large sums of money in a responsible way and ensure that the way it is invested for the cause is justified by the dividends we'll get out of it. That's what I'm talking about. Now, knowing that I had custody of this money, it's in a building society, Mr. Griffin wrote to me last year and said, look, I'm asking you to contribute a 5-figure sum from the money in your possession to the European election fund. And I wrote back, or emailed back, and I said, Nick, you should know this, but I'm telling you in case you need reminding, I do not believe in this Euro election campaign that you're doing. I believe that we should fight 1, maybe 2, at the very most 3 regions, which would cost a fraction of what you're trying to raise to fight the whole country. I don't believe in it, and I'm not going to put this money over into your hands for it to be thrown down the drain. And I said, furthermore, if you want to find money to finance your European election campaign, I suggest you take a look at the party payroll, where God knows how many people, at the last count 30 plus, were being paid money out of party funds. I suggest you take a look at that, cut down your payroll, and you'll find a lot more money thereby available to fight your Euro election. Now, when I was in charge of the BNP, we had a payroll of 3 and a bit people. That sounds a bit Irish, doesn't it? 3 and a bit people. The fact is that 3 people were paid to work for the BNP full-time, and one other person, Nick Griffin namely, was paid mostly by Spearhead to work more or less nearly full-time on Spearhead, but to do some work for the BNP as well, and he was paid a sort of portion of a wage. So we had 3 and a bit, a payroll of 3 and a bit. Now we have 30 plus. Now I don't dispute the BNP has grown since then. It would be very surprising over 5 years, with the enormous tide of public opinion flowing in our favour, if it hadn't grown. Of course it's grown, but I cannot believe that it's grown to the extent of paying all the people who are now currently being paid. And so I asked the question, are they being paid because it's right to pay them, or are they being paid to keep them quiet and keep them compliant, and to keep them saying yes, yes, yes all the time? That's the question I asked. Mr. Griffin did not like that reply, but I made it very clear that I was not going to hand over that money to be thrown down the drain. Well, we all know what happened last month. We didn't win a single seat. I think we were right to fight 1 or 2, perhaps at the outset 3, the outside 3. We should have fought no more. We could have spent a fraction of the money that was spent, and we could have invested that money in waging a much more effective campaign in local government, particularly here in the north of England. We could have maybe not put up more candidates, but we could have put more effort and backing behind the candidates we had. There should have been more focus on the local government elections. The leadership should have been primarily focused on that, helping and guiding and in every way encouraging local election campaigns, and not thinking all the time about these mythical, magical seats in the Euro Parliament that were going to somehow come along if everybody coughed up enough money to do it. Of course, we know it didn't happen. Now, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, this was a disastrous decision. Sometimes you make wrong decisions, and I made a few, in circumstances where there is an excuse, where, you know, you have to try an experiment. We had an experiment when we fought the Euros in 1999. I didn't know what the profit would be out of it. It was an experiment. I was bound to admit afterwards that it didn't repay the effort we'd made. So we can all make mistakes. But there is no excuse for failing to learn by mistakes that have been made previously. And that lesson was not learned in 2004, and a vast amount of money, vast by our standards, was thrown down the drain when it could have been conserved and used for better purposes. Now, we now come to what I regard as the final straw. You all know, nearly all of you will know, that a motion was put, but the motion has not actually been put, I'm using the wrong words. A proposal was being put around the party in a circular that we now change the rules of the party to admit non-white members. I've seen this brewing for quite some time. I know that Mr. Griffin has been flying a kite for quite a long time, and he couldn't decide whether it's the time to try this stunt or not. But he has now decided that it's the time to try it. And in justification of this change, he has said, I think Peter Rushton has mentioned this earlier, he has said, well, we are likely to be faced with a legal obligation to admit non-white members. We could be facing expensive lawsuits. This is interesting, coming from someone who wasted £12,000 of nationalist money trying to expel me. It's touching to know that Mr. Griffin is now concerned about money thrown down the drain in lawsuits, but there we are. Anticipating that we may face a lawsuit, and we must change our rules in anticipation of this. Now that is absolute nonsense. And I'm going to read to you words from an article which said exactly the same as I have just said. It is nonsense. This article said, blacks in the BNP, question mark. This is another area where there are two motives for suggesting the thing in question. A few individuals, the good-hearted but politically naive, think it would be a good thing because it would help us to overcome a racist tag which undoubtedly costs us a significant amount of support. Well, that could be questioned, but we won't question that now. We'll go on. Others, the enemy plants and the plain malcontents, I wonder who this writer means. The plain malcontents know that this isn't really going to happen. Blacks being allowed to join the BNP, Asians being allowed to join the BNP. It's not going to happen, folks. But these people who suggest that it's going to happen, they understand that so many BNP members are absolutely sick of political correctness and enforce multiculturalism, that the idea that it could happen in the party is itself deeply disturbing, and hence a very good weapon to provoke internal dissension. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, those people who were daring to suggest that there was a plan to admit non-whites to the BNP were only manufacturing this in order to create internal dissension. Just mark those words. Mark those words carefully. This writer goes on to say, well, I can tell them here and now that it isn't. That is to say, it isn't going to happen with the non-whites joining the BNP. The BNP's constitution expressly states that only individuals of British, i.e. English, Scots, Welsh and Irish, or closely kindred European stock, may join as members. Not only do I not intend to try to change this fundamental rule, but I would vigorously oppose anyone else ever attempting to push for such a change, and I have no doubt that a large majority of the party would back me on this. Mark those words. At the end of this article, or the end of this section of a larger article dealing with this subject, at a certain point before he ends, he has to say, that is why the British National Party has to stay white. Stay white. Yeah. And at the end of this article it says this, only one thing could change this, and that would be the imposition of a Europe-wide change in the law, which would ban any political party which operates what the liberal left would describe as a, quote, racist, unquote, membership policy. Clearly that would then require very careful consideration in the light of the necessities of organizational survival. And mark this, closing words. Unless or until that time, I would stress, however, that the British National Party's current membership requirements should not be changed. Now, was this John Tyndall writing in Spearhead? No. This was Nick Griffin writing in Identity magazine in December 2003, a mere 7 months ago. Now, Mrs. Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, as later became, said the lady is not for turning. This man has turned so often and so fast, we just cannot keep track of him, where he's heading, where he's going, where he's pointing. Griffin gave us a pledge in his magazine Identity that this would not happen 7 months ago. And he said that it could only be considered if we were facing a change, or we had a change in the law. He said, until this happens, not the supposition that it might happen, until it happens, this will not be changed. You're going right back on that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is, as I've said, to me, the final straw. the final straw. I have been deeply worrying about the direction taken by this party over 5 years, and I have always felt in my guts that it was going to come to something like this. So I can tell you it is no surprise. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what are we to do? It is no good just holding meetings at which we moan, we complain, we beef, we sound off. We've got to fight it.
Yeah.
And I am prepared to lead that fight, if you will support me. I did notice at this meeting that I intend to challenge Nick Griffin in a leadership ballot for the leadership of the BNP in the next... Probably next year.
Yes.
Probably. But let me tell you this, I am not going to stage a kamikaze attack. I'm going to challenge him when I believe that it can be done. And if it means delaying it, however frustrating that may be, then there must be a delay. I'm determined that this battle will be fought on the right ground at the right moment when we have the balance of forces in our favour. But I hope it will be possible next summer. Now that means we've got to do a great deal, to help this fight. You're not doing it for me, ladies and gentlemen. You're doing it to keep the BNP a nationalist party for a white Britain. That's what we're here. I'm just going to be an instrument of that, along with many other instruments of that. And I'm not a young man anymore, and if I can find someone who can take over the reins after all this nonsense has been done away with and we've cleaned out this party, if I can find someone younger to take over the job, then I will be more than happy to put the reins in that person's hands. But for the moment, I'm prepared to lead this fight, and I need your support. Now, this does not mean just, applause, although I appreciate that. This means working and campaigning. It means people standing up and being counted. Now, this crew of people took over the BNP 5 years ago because a lot of good people in the party stood up to be counted. And they say, I back Nick Griffin for leadership. And the more people saw other people backing them, the more they thought, well, I better back them too. That seems to be the tide, that seems to be the bandwagon. I lost count of the number of people who supported Nick Griffin's bid for the leadership in 1999, who before very long bitterly regretted it. And last night I spent the evening with two of them, Steve and Sharon Edwards, who were the hub of the BNP in the West Midlands. Along with others, there were others who made good contribution too, but Steve and Sharon Edwards, the BNP never recovered in the West Midlands from the time they left the party in disgust at the way that many things done by Mr. Griffin. They bitterly regretted it. Now they're in another party. And I spent the evening discussing with them how we could rejoin forces and how we could together fight the thing that has to be fought. Now, it's for Steve and Sharon to make their own decisions and to speak on their own behalf. It's no use me trying to sort of dragoon them ahead of time and push them into doing something that they're not ready to do. I sincerely hope that they will come back into the BNP, and I have been pushing and pushing and pushing to get them to do so. I hope it will happen, but it'll happen by their decision in their good time. There are certain practical complications. Sharon Edwards is a local councillor, and Steve Edwards hopes next year to be a local councillor. There are certain practical complications. But in the fullness of time, I hope that these good people, and so many others, will come back in the BNP and work together with us. People who have been disgusted at what has been going on. Now, earlier in this meeting, Tony Braithwaite paid tribute to the effort made by Chris Allen to promote and organise this meeting, and I must absolutely second that declaration. I have greatly admired what has been done by Chris, but not only by Chris, but by many others too. Chris Allen is banned from joining the BNP. God knows why. A man of this ability, a man of this commitment and dedication and enthusiasm, who could be a tower of strength to the BNP here in Leeds, where they do need people like him, has been kept out of the party. He is my own. And of course, the more senior people are in the party, the more high profile they are in the party, you know, the more of a challenge it is to them to stand up and be counted. This happened in 1999. People stood up to be counted, many of them to their everlasting subsequent regret. I could reel off a list of these people who have written to me how wrong I was to back Griffin back in 1999. I'm going to mention all their names. I've just mentioned two. We need people to stand up and be counted. Now, there's the old joke about Khrushchev. I'm sure many of you heard it.
Yeah.
When Khrushchev took over the Communist Party in Russia, and he started de-Stalinization, and he got up at the meeting of the Supreme Soviet, and he went a long list of all the crimes of Stalin. Stalin did this, and Stalin did that, done the other. Stalin was terrible. We've got to change, we've got to have new policies. At the end of Khrushchev's speech, he said, right, any questions? Someone came up to the platform with a little bit of paper and passed him a note from a person at the back of the crowd. Great big meeting, hundreds, thousands of people there. The Supreme Soviet, vast audience. And Khrushchev read out this note. And the note said, what were you doing when all this was happening under Stalin? Would the gentleman or lady who sent up this bit of paper with this question please stand up and identify themselves? Nobody stood up. And Khrushchev thereupon said, that was what I was doing when all these crimes started. That is what we're up against, ladies and gentlemen, the timidity of people who are afraid to be identified, afraid to speak their minds. Everyone from this meeting has got to go home from here this afternoon, this evening, and have a think about what they're going to do. Yeah, well, I would like to see Tyndall and his supporters retake the party. That would be nice. We'll be back on the straight and narrow again. But I will hide in my little foxhole until I can see real signs that it's likely to happen. And then I'll come out of my foxhole and I'll wave my little banner and I say, yes, we want Tyndall back. Now that is not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going into my reprimanding mode at the moment. It doesn't necessarily apply to any of you. But I'm sure it applies to people whom you know in your own branches. People have got to stand up and be counted. They mustn't remain in their little foxholes. Now, it may well be that as a result of this speech here this afternoon, Mr. Griffin will have another go at expelling me. Well, these threats of expulsion don't frighten me. Mr. Griffin tried to expel me before, and I took him to law, and he was forced to go back on that decision and readmit me. He would have gone to court, but he was advised by his solicitors that if it went to court, he'd lose, and a lot of money would be thrown down the drain in the process. And so there was an out-of-court settlement whereby I was allowed back. Big deal, what an honour. To be allowed back into Mr. Griffin's party. Well, if he expels me again, if he wants another fight, he can have one. If he tries to expel me as a result of what I say here this afternoon, I will take him to law again, if I had to. And the means are there to do it. I would far rather those means be used on something constructive, to promote our cause, to promote our party, literature, propaganda, meetings, election campaigns. I would far rather that. But if Mr. Griffin forces me to another legal action, then another legal action I will take. And I shall go on fighting this. If he throws me out of the party, I shall go on fighting him from outside the party. This is a fight which I am not going to give up ever, ever, ever. I can promise you, in my campaign to take back the leadership of this party, I will stick to the truth. I will not tell lies to further my own campaign, to further my own cause. I don't need to. The truth is strong enough. The truth is here. In this article, and in a declaration only 7 months later, which represented a complete about term. The truth is strong enough. We don't need lies. Now, I could relate a long story, and I don't want to keep you here all evening, because I could keep you here all evening, relating a long story about the lies, the dishonesties that were employed to get me out of the leadership back in 1999. One was story going around as I was an alcoholic. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. I hate alcoholism, and I feel some sympathy for people who have been through that problem, but God willing, I've never had that problem. I hardly drink a drop. I don't need to tell you this. I'll probably have a good drink or two this evening. But what a pitiful lie. Blackmail was employed. People were blackmailed into voting a certain way by a threat that if the candidate didn't win, they'd split the party. One London organiser told me that he voted for Mr. Griffin because he felt it was the only way to avoid a split in the party. Because Mr. Griffin would split and form another party if he didn't get in. Now, you know, what kind of logic is that? But that London organiser, for perfectly good reasons, as it appeared to him at the time, voted that way because there was a threat of a split. People were blackmailed. And people were also bribed. I know of one case of someone who was bribed. They're going to have full-time regional organisers. They're all going to be paid. All over the country are going to be paid. And you, the person I'm talking to, you will be the first to qualify. You'll be the first on the list. I was told that by that very person. I'm not going to mention his name, but I can tell you that story is true. People were bribed. One of Mr. Griffin's allies got up at a meeting not far from here, in the north of England, the other side of the Pennines, only a short time back. They said, oh yes, when John Tyndall goes and speaks at meetings, he makes these rousing speeches, and all his supporters are Sieg Heiling in the audience. Have you ever heard such ridiculous fantasy as that? A senior official in our party, and I have witnesses here today who can testify that. In fact, those people told me, and I don't doubt what they said was the truth. That person actually said that Tyndall's supporters give him Hitler salutes when he makes a speech. These are the kinds of lies. We don't need this. This party, this movement of ours, is in business to clean up British politics. To clear out the Blairs, the liars, the Tony Blairs, the Mandelsons, and all the rest of the peddlers of untruth, the deceivers, the crooks, the liars, the people who lied us into Iraq, the people who lied us into every crisis over the past 50 years or so. We don't want that. We don't need that in our politics because, ladies and gentlemen, the truth is strong enough. And if we place ourselves behind the banner of truth and we stick to the truth, our case is unassailable. And with the truth, we will win.